Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a crochet experiment. I love crocheting. I've been doing it for like 10 years. My absolute favorite thing to crochet is plushies. 2 years ago, roughly, when ChatGPT started really going off online, I thought it would be really funny to try to ask it to write me a crochet plushie pattern. I prompted it and this is what I got. Can you guess who he is? It is none other than Bart Simpson. So if you guessed that, you are correct. It should be obvious by the giant black eyes, the tongue sticking out, and the giant red bow tie that Bart always wears. The little pants just kill me. I absolutely love this. The proportions are so great. But anyway, now that AI has had a couple of years to cook, I wanted to see how they were at making crochet patterns at this point. I know some platforms are totally overrun with crochet AI images and paid AI patterns that don't make any sense. That's not really what this video is about. I really want to see how it compares to this, how it used to do back in the day. So today I challenged DeepSeek to write me 5 different crochet plushie patterns, and we are going to see how it does. Come with me. I'll walk you through the whole thing. So to start us off, we have our favorite blue hedgehog, Sonic. I thought Sonic would be a really funny option to try because he's got some very distinct features that I wasn't sure how to translate. Specifically, I wasn't sure how DeepSeek was going to handle the spikes on the back of the head and the windshield wiper ass eyes. I was really curious what DeepSeek would give me. So I prompted it and gathered my materials. The pattern suggested I get blue, peach, white, black, and green or red for the shoes. According to the pattern, the shoes are optional, but gather those 2 colors just in case. I also grabbed my 3.75mm crochet hook. This is my old standby for plushies, and honestly, I don't know where my 3 to 3.75 crochet hooks are. I get an ergonomic pack every couple of years, but somehow I end up losing a majority of them. The pattern also suggested I grab safety eyes. I don't have safety eyes, so anytime that it suggests one of those in this video, I just embroidered it on instead. For all these patterns, I also used polyfill, my scissors, and a yarn needle. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing it had me do was Sonic's muzzle in the color peach. This yarn is actually called peach. It's a little bit pinker than Sonic's normal muzzle, but I still went for this one. The muzzle was really simple, just increase from a magic ring to 30 stitches, and then do another 3 rounds of 30 stitches. Not increasing the stitches for the last 3 rounds ended up making this concave bowl kind of shape. So far, so good. Now for the rest of the head. This was done in blue, very classic sphere shape, just increasing to 36 stitches, going around a couple times, and then decreasing. I tend to stuff my plushies about 2 rows from the end, just so I have room to get my fingers in there and stuff it. After I stuffed it up, I closed it up and attached the muzzle to the head. The biggest thing I noticed at this point is the head is not much bigger than the muzzle. The muzzle is actually really big in comparison, and the pattern instructed me to sew this muzzle on between rows 7 and 10. This is a really small amount of space to try to sew this muzzle on. The muzzle would have to be squished down into a pretty narrow oval to fit into this spot. So I figured I would just start sewing the muzzle onto row 7 and just kind of squish it along the way to see really how narrow I could get it. I tried to keep the margins as narrow as possible, but there was only so far I could squish it without the sides kind of flipping up or getting too folded over and looking really odd. I definitely went outside the rows that it suggested I sew it to, just because it was so difficult to sew it on in this small amount of space. Once the muzzle was almost nearly sewed on, I put a little stuffing in there. The floppy half sphere kind of shape would look really really weird if I didn't. After stuffing, I finished sewing the muzzle on and I got this shape. I think he kind of looks like a platypus at this point. It's not too bad. Let's just keep trucking and see how it goes. Next was the body. Nothing really exciting, just kind of started it off normally as a sphere shape. It was a little bit smaller in diameter than the head, but a little bit longer. For this part, I was instructed to decrease to 18 stitches, but not close the body shape up. I had to sew the open side onto the bottom of the head. Now I had a platypus with no legs. The next part of the pattern was Sonic's spines. I really love that it only asked me to make 3 of these. DeepSeek seemed to look at a picture of Sonic in the angle he's normally pictured, like from the side, and decided 3 was enough. Anyway, I was supposed to work in back loop only for a ridge texture, but when I look at these, they don't really look much different than the normal crochet I was doing. The result was this footballish sort of shape. It had me increase to 15 stitches and then decrease for the last 2 rows, so it made this odd kind of shape. After that, it was instructed to sew the spines on in a fan shape on the back of the head. I wasn't really sure if it wanted me to do hot dog way or hamburger way, if that makes any sense. One way, it kind of just looked like a mohawk or a dinosaur. So for a little bit more 3D realism, I arranged them horizontally, upwardly curving. 3 still looked really funny like this, but I found it a little bit more appealing. Since it didn't indicate how I was exactly supposed to put the spines on, I thought this was fine. Next is the part I hate the most about making plushies, and that is arms and legs. The arms were done in blue in sort of a 3D rendered movie type Sonic way, except for no glove. These were just 2 little tubes, increasing to 12 stitches for 4 rounds and then back down to 9 for 3 rounds. Now for the legs, in the pattern itself, it was suggested to do optional green shoes. So it had me gather up red before, but it only wanted me to use green for the shoes. The green shoes were optional, but I wanted to make them anyway. I thought that would be very funny. I don't know where it pulled green shoes from, but whatever, we went with it. It didn't actually tell me in the pattern when to switch from the green shoes to the blue legs, so I decided I would do it right before decreasing the stitch circumference. It just kind of made the most sense that way. This ended up being about 5 rows in, and now he has these cute little green shoes that taper off. I stuffed these all and I had a beautiful little pile of leggies. The pattern also didn't tell me exactly where to sew the arms and legs on, so I did them how I normally would arrange them. Next was the ears. For these, it instructed me to make 4 pieces. First, 2 blue circles and 2 peach circles, slightly smaller than the blue ones. It instructed me to flatten the outer ear into a teardrop shape and then sew the inner ear onto the outer ear. This didn't make sense, so I just sewed them both together and then flattened them all as one piece. I squished it into a little cat ear sort of shape and sewed them up. Finally was embroidery. The beginning of the pattern suggested white for the eyes, so I started with that. I ended up asking later how exactly it wanted me to do the eyes, and it told me to do a flat white circle with a black pupil in the middle. So I did exactly what it instructed me to do. The nose was supposed to be a black triangle and then 1 tiny upward stitch for the mouth. I ended up doing a little smile because I think that is cute. The pattern also suggested I give Sonic cheek fluff in white. I really didn't know what it meant by cheek fluff, but the cheek fluff was optional, so I just didn't do it. I was really happy with how it looked at this point, so I just left it. That's the end of the pattern, and here is the result. I think this Sonic is really adorable. The proportions are really cute. It looks like something I would find as extremely, extremely bootleg merch. You can tell that it's going for Sonic, but it's not exactly right. There are definitely some details missing. It didn't get the big windshield wiper eyes. The spikes are weird. The proportions are wildly off. And of course, the green shoes. This isn't exactly amazing for a Sonic result, but you can kind of tell what it was going for, and it came out really cute, so I'm not going to complain about it. I love him, and I'm obsessed with him, and he's great. So the next pattern I ended up doing was Waluigi. I also thought this would be a really funny option considering it's a very lanky character with a lot of detail, so I really wasn't sure how DeepSeek was going to handle this one. I specifically thought this plushie would be hard for AI to get correctly, so I started prompting. To be completely honest, the one that I ended up using was not the original pattern it gave me. Originally, it gave me Waluigi with a purple head instead of a purple hat. I thought this plushie is gonna look freaky enough, so I prompted it a couple more times to give me something with a skin-toned head. To begin, I gathered my materials. This time I needed purple, black, white, yellow, brown, and skin tone yarn. It also wanted me to use a crochet hook that was slightly smaller, so I went with a 2.75mm hook. This is one that suggested wire for posable limbs. I didn't do that. I didn't want to. I wanted him to be squishy and huggable. So first things first, we started on the head. This was a very simple pattern, just sort of an oblong egg-shaped sphere that went up to 24 stitches this time. After that, it wanted me to embroider already. I skipped that for now, but I did follow the nose pattern that it asked me to do. This was just a very small half sphere, so I did that very quickly. Our next piece to make was the hat. It wanted me to do it in black, so I grabbed my black yarn and I started going. And going. And going. And how big is this hat going to be? This hat was literally a row bigger than the head. This piece was incredibly large. It was shocking. It also suggested to make a brim by crocheting one long chain, single crocheting around, and then slip stitching the thing onto the hat. This is like an egg-shaped top hat. It also wanted me to crochet a white W to stick on the hat in the front. You know, Waluigi's classic white W. It gave me a pattern to make the crochet W, actually. It wanted me to chain 7 and single crochet / slip stitch all the way until the end to make a zigzag. This is what I got. An absolutely perfect W. Since that didn't work, I just embroidered one on his hat. After that, I sewed the hat on his head and sewed the nose to his face. Then I embroidered the face details on. The eyes were supposed to be safety eyes. Again, I didn't use those, so I just embroidered little black beads about 5 stitches apart on the face. It then told me to add eyelids, so I put those on. I also added his mustache, which was supposed to be 3 strands of yarn and an upward curving W under the nose, so I did that as well. It also suggested to sew 3 to 4 strands of hair under the brim of his hat, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that yet, so I went back to that later. I moved on to the shirt in purple after that. This part was really simple, just an elongated tube. It had me not close up the bottom so I could attach the legs later. After that, I made black overalls. These were just 2 panels that gradually got smaller toward the top. After those 2 were complete, I made the 2 straps to go with it, and we'll loop back to assembling them later. Next were the arms. It had me start with a black glove for these ones, so I did those for 6 rounds, and then I switched to purple until we got little tubes. After that, it wanted me to surface crochet white around the cuff of the glove. Okay, I did that. After that, the brown shoes. It was kind of the same situation with the legs. Brown shoes for 6 rounds and then switching to black for the pants. On those ones, it wanted me to surface crochet white around the base of the shoe. Next was Waluigi's classic yellow belt. I didn't understand this at all. Not only was the belt chain supposed to be way bigger than the body I was supposed to wrap it around, but it wanted me to make a massive 4 stitch by 4 stitch belt buckle. I have no idea where this belt buckle came from. After I finished all these parts, I had to assemble it all together. I kind of had to use an odd strategy to get the legs on the body, considering I had to attach the overall panels and these legs that were each 18 stitches around to a body that ended at 21 stitches around. I ended up accomplishing this by attaching the legs together with a few stitches in between them, basically to make an oval shape that I could sew onto the body. The biggest downfall of this pattern was just no instruction on doing this. This is why you buy crochet patterns from people who know what they're doing. After I got the legs on, I sewed the overalls on, attached the straps, embroidered some buttons, and then put the belt on him. It also told me to double crochet 2 purple rounds around his neck to give him a little turtleneck. The last detail it wanted me to add was duplicate stitch white lines onto the brown shoes. Really didn't know what it wanted me to do there, so I just embroidered 2 white lines on it like shoelaces. Oh, I also went back and stitched 3 strands of hair right under the front of his hat. Here is the finished Waluigi. He looks like a king's guard. I really don't know where this massive black hat came from. The belt genuinely befuddles me. I really don't understand this. He's kind of cute, but he does not really resemble Waluigi whatsoever. He's just a mustached man in a purple hat. These proportions are extremely weird. The legs are odd. The arms are quite long. The nose is really big and honking. I don't really get this. He's kind of cute though. I can't really complain too much. I mean, I know what I was getting myself into. I think it might have been the level of detail that tripped DeepSeek up the most, but that's all right. I don't mind him. He's fine. The next pattern I asked for was Shrek. I thought this would be a pretty funny option, although truthfully, I didn't think DeepSeek would have too difficult of a time with this. I don't think Shrek has any crazy proportions or anything too wild about him, except for maybe the ears. I wasn't really sure how it was going to interpret that. It only took 1 try to get a decently accurate color pattern, unlike Waluigi. I just needed green, brown, white, black, light beige, and dark green yarn. I also continued with my 2.75mm hook and all of the other stuff I've been using for all these patterns. First off, we've got classic sphere for the head. Same kind of deal, just increasing to 30 stitches and decreasing to close. At this point, the pattern instructed me to add the nose, but I prefer to keep all my embroidery and fiddly stuff all to the end of the pattern. At this point, I did my most egregious act of defying the AI. The pattern wanted me to make his shirt in dark green. I didn't want to do this. I should have probably followed its instructions, but honestly, at this point, I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, and I wanted it to at least be mildly recognizable as Shrek, so I went with the light beige. I started out with the light beige for 10 rounds, and then switched to dark brown to start creating his pants. I added an extra row on the lower body because it did the same kind of thing. It wanted me to only go to 12 stitches at the end. I wanted to close it up properly, so I added an extra row. Next were 2 green Cheeto-shaped arms. This one I also had to interpret a little bit. It wanted me to increase the diameter of the crochet. It wanted me to start with 6 stitches around for a couple rows and then extend to 12 at the end. I'm assuming it was trying to get me to shape a hand. Because I wanted the nice stitches to be on the outside and at the end of the hand, I kind of flipped this pattern and started out working up to 12 and then made the arm. I don't know if it actually wanted me to give Shrek juicy biceps, but it might have been oversight on my part. I really don't know. The legs were 2 little brown torpedo type shapes. Nothing too exciting about them. They were decently proportional to the arms, just a little bit wider and 2 rows shorter. I was the most interested in how the AI would interpret the ears, so this was my chance to find out. These were done largely the way that the Sonic pattern had me do it. 2 green circles with 2 smaller light beige circles sewn on the inside. It wanted me to flatten it out into an ear shape, but I wasn't really sure what it meant by that. I kind of just pinched it at the end and sewed it up halfway, kind of like a little trumpet shape. After making all the loose parts, I assembled everything. First, I put the head on the body, sewed the arms on, then the legs, and then I put the ears on. After sewing Throwing all the parts on, it was time for the details. The AI instructed me to use white yarn to crochet a couple of small circles for the eyes and then add black pupils looking slightly grumpy. I don't really know how you make pupils look grumpy, so I just put pupils on. I don't think he looks grumpy at all. I think he's kind of cute, actually. At this point, I did the nose also. It was supposed to be a dark green triangle, so I just kind of sewed that on in kind of a little bit of a flatter shape. It wanted me to add thick angled brows in black yarn, so I added those on as well. It also wanted a slight smirk or frown. I kind of just gave him a smile. What can I say? I want to make my plushies happy and smiling. The next part drove me crazy after making Waluigi. Another belt with a giant belt buckle. The belt part makes sense. Shrek has a belt, but the big belt buckle, I just can't wrap my mind around it. It wanted me to make a brown chain, single crochet around and sew that on, and then add a 3-stitch by 3-stitch black belt buckle on the front. It doesn't make any sense, but I did it anyway. It wanted me to. That's about it for that, and here he is. What do you think? I can tell that it was going for Shrek, for sure. He's pretty adorable. I'll definitely be keeping this one because I accidentally pricked my finger when I was putting his arms on. So he's got a little bit of blood on one of these arms. Oops. I think maybe if I took a little bit more care making his face, he would look a bit more Shrek-like, but there's only so much you can do with these instructions. He actually kind of ended up looking a bit Yoda-ish, probably because of the way that the ears were put on the head, but even higher up, I think it would look worse, so I don't know. He's not bad. He's pretty cute. You can tell what it's supposed to be, but it's not really Shrek. I love him though. He's cute. After Shrek, we have one that I think came out very cute, and that is Pikachu. I thought Pikachu would be pretty easy for the AI to replicate, actually, considering Pikachu's kind of tube-like body. I just thought that maybe the ears and the tail might cause a little bit of a challenge, but I believed in DeepSeek for this one. We started with yellow, red, black, and brown yarn. I ended up using a tiny bit of yellow also. I switched back to my 3.75mm crochet hook because at this point I had been crocheting for hours and my hands were starting to hurt from using these tiny little hooks. All these patterns start roughly the same with a head. This was a considerably bigger head at 36 stitches around and 19 rows. I think it's already looking quite adorable. The body was very similar, just a little bit smaller than the head, and once I added them together, I had this cute little snowman looking thing. Next thing were the ears. They were almost flat circles. They were just these concave shapes that DeepSeek loves to make. I started out with yellow for 4 rounds and then switched to brown for the rest of the ear pattern. The pattern also wanted me to flatten out the ears. I wasn't really sure what it meant by this, so I asked, and it wanted me to basically fold them in half and sew it up along the side. I ended up stuffing them a little bit because they're very large and I didn't want them to flop over once I added them to the head. This pattern called for some very tiny arms. These were 6 stitches for 6 rows. This truly killed my hands. It killed my hands to the point that I was grateful for an even slightly bigger piece with the legs being 12 stitches around. Those were only 5 rows. The last part I had to crochet was the tail. I love the tail that it asked me to make. It was kind of a creative approach. It had me make sort of a striped raccoon sort of tail. I started with brown for 3 rows and then switched alternatively between yellow and brown every single row. The pattern wanted me to flatten the tail and stick it onto the body, but forgive me, I couldn't help myself. I stuffed it and stuck it on the back of the body like that. I just thought it would be way cuter if it was stuffed. I didn't want a flat, floppy tail. Assembly time came next. I put the ears on the head, then the arms and legs, and then after that got into the embroidery. I made 2 tiny black crocheted circles for the eyes eyes and I added a little speck of light on them with white yarn. I also crocheted the same size of circle for the cheek blush, just in red. I embroidered a tiny black triangle for the nose and gave Pikachu sort of a little cat mouth shape. Here is the final product. I adore this plushie. It looks a lot like Pichu, I would say, instead of Pikachu. I blame the actual Pikachu plushie that I was staring at when I was making the face for how Pikachu-ish it looks. The ears, I think, were a very interesting approach. I know Pikachu normally only has color on the top of the ear, but I think it looks pretty good and it's kind of beginner friendly for the ears. The tail I'm absolutely obsessed with. I think it looks super cute. And overall, I am obsessed with this plushie. Not quite Pikachu, kind of Pichu, but overall a very cute little guy. I really like this one. For the last one, I let DeepSeek make the choice. I basically prompted it with all the ones that I made before and told it that I didn't want any characters from any of the universes these characters came from. I was delighted to find out that DeepSeek wanted me to make Totoro. I thought this would be so cute to crochet, and also I thought DeepSeek might be pretty accurate with this considering the very simple shapes. There's also not a whole lot of crazy details that Totoro has, so I had high hopes for this one. I gathered some sparkly gray yarn, white and black. This was also made with a 3.75 millimeter hook. The body and the head were worked in one continuous piece. It ended up being basically the same size as Pikachu's head. I whipped that up real quick, stuffed it, and closed it up. I thought the sparkle yarn was so stinking pretty. The belly it called for was one of those concave shapes that DeepSeek loves to make. I made this in white. I thought I was gonna have to stuff this a little bit because of the extra rows, but because of the shape of Totoro's head and body, it actually fit on really well. Just sewed that on real quick. For the ears, it had me use exactly the same strategy as Pikachu's ears, except for no color changes. I made 2 slightly concave circles, folded up in half, gave them a little bit of stuffing, and sewed them all up. These really looked like bunny ears at this point. They were very cute. I didn't have to make any legs this time, but the arms were super, super tiny. These were just 4 rows of 6 stitches. So adorable and tiny. I could barely stuff these. Next was the tail. This pattern wanted me to do 9 rounds of only 4 stitches. Y'all, if you have tried doing this before, you know that trying to crochet in such a tight little circle is really killer on the hands. I ended up basically doing the opposite of what it wanted me to do. I made a chain of 9 stitches and did that for 4 rows and just kind of sewed that into a long tube instead of doing it the other way. It was the same result, it just didn't hurt my hands as much. This was a huge departure from Totoro. This is more like a long cattail instead of Totoro's little fan-shaped tail. After assembling everything, putting the arms on, the tail on, and the ears, I embroidered the details. 2 little eyes, a triangle nose, and 3 whiskers on both sides. The thing that surprised me was DeepSeek telling me to make teeth. It wanted me to do 2 upside down V shapes in white right above its belly. I'm assuming this was the interpretation of the little markings on Totoro's tummy, but I put them on as it said anyway. Here he is. I think he came out extremely adorable. I love the shape. I love this glittery sparkle yarn. The cattail is rather cute. The proportions are definitely off, but I just think he is so cute. I really, really love him. I think with just a couple tweaks, this would be a pretty faithful interpretation of Totoro. Here's some footage of the whole crew, including Bart from a couple years ago. I honestly adore them all. I cherish them. I am a plushie lover. The conclusion I can draw from this, though, is AI is not there yet for crochet patterns, and if you want a crochet pattern that actually makes sense and looks decently like the character you're trying to make, just get it from a person. There are so many talented crochet artists out there. Get a good pattern. It'll make a lot more sense. I had to use a lot of artistic interpretation for these patterns because some of the stuff that it was asking me to do just didn't make sense. It also didn't give a whole lot of detail on where to attach things or what your embroidery should look like, so that was also up to my own interpretation. I had a lot of fun doing this. It was really fun to see how far AI came on crochet patterns. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Happy crocheting, and I'll see you next time. Mwah!